One of the hallmarks of intelligence is critical thinking, an ability to look at something, do a bit of digging to find out what it really is and where it came from, weigh up both sides, interrogate from all angles, and then make up your mind if you can. I always found that kind of intelligence engaging, exciting, and essential if you want to find your way through life. It's what builds decent societies, creates laws, educational systems, invents and administers healthcare and medicines. If it fails, then everything else fails. We fall apart morally, politically, and eventually physically. That kind of intelligence doesn't assume it holds the high moral ground. It resists off-the-shelf opinions and easy moralizing. It doesn't even always assume that it's right. It is prepared to face uncomfortable truths, to have difficult conversations, and if necessary, it's prepared to put its head above the parapet. And it does this because it knows more than anything else that this is what has created civilized societies, however flawed and damaged they may be. It's the ability to criticize, analyze, and question that gives us stature as human beings. It doesn't follow fashions. It isn't hungry for attention or rewards or praise or money. It just wants to know. In the modern Western world, that kind of intelligence is being murdered. The first step, which is well advanced, is to outlaw it. And of course, when you outlaw speech, to some extent, you outlaw thought. It's why you will rarely see debating skills properly taught, where you must occupy a point of view not your own in order to see its strengths and weaknesses and see the strengths and weaknesses of your own point of view, which is what good military tacticians do all the time. You don't rush onto a battlefield and say, unless you call me Z or Zay or some other ludicrous gender pronoun, I'm going to report you to the authorities. The reason you don't do that is you'd get your head blown off. You don't go into battle saying, I'm a member of an oppressed minority, so you're not allowed to be against me. And the reason you don't do that is that you'd get your head blown off. Unless the enemy is so stupid that they apologise and support you for the rest of your life, which is what happens now. We kowtow to all kinds of nonsense in the name of progressivism, but it isn't progress. It is a sliding backwards into the abyss. Intelligence does not back down for the sake of political correctness. No, you study your adversary, you try to work out what they will do and take preemptive action so that, hopefully, you won't even have to fight them. Intelligence doesn't want violence, it wants truth and clarity, and that is what it strives for in the individual human mind and in society. If you look in more detail at what this kind of intelligence is, its job is to dissent. That's its purpose, to question orthodoxies, to probe received opinion, to unpack assertions, not to take anything for granted, to doubt until you achieve a reasonable degree of certainty, to have the courage to be an intellectual resistance fighter rather than a high priest of dogma, to debate and discuss at as high a level as possible. The job of intelligence is to describe and engage with reality. Intelligence thrives on facts and knowledge, not hearsay or opinion. Our culture now runs completely against that. It now shakily builds itself on fear, propaganda, assertions, hysteria, shouting down, silencing or destroying opposition to prevailing orthodoxies. Intelligence is never pleased with itself because there is always more work to do, whereas received opinion is only pleased with itself because it always considers itself to be right, even in its huffing and puffing hatred. Even its hatred of opposition is a form of self-love. The enemies of intelligence hate reality because it is not where they live. They live in a cloudy bubble of sound bites and politically correct junk. Look at the way someone like Andrew Marr is a one-note instrument of establishment propaganda. Toot, 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 ad infinitum. This is not investigative journalism, it's blind faith fueled by hatred and vindictiveness. Above all, it wants to exclude, to punish and reject. It wants to murder dissent. It wants to beat intelligence to a mindless pulp of acquiescence, or bore it to death. And it might just succeed. Brexit is a good example of the murder of intelligence. Most people know that democracy means adhering to and delivering the will of the majority. The majority voted to leave. And the sheer volume of bullshit that's stopped that happening is an affront to ordinary human intelligence. The excuses are pathetic, that we didn't understand what we were voting for, that people were misled, that getting a deal is a separate thing. It's all nonsense. The frightening thing is that people you might otherwise think are ordinary, intelligent human beings fell for the whole charade, which is a sure sign that human intelligence is rapidly falling apart. We may never leave the EU, not in any proper final sense that people voted for. I don't think I ever thought we would. In France, there is an intellectual genocide. The press, all outlets for free speech are being squeezed until intelligent discourse is suppressed. Writers like Eric Zemmour have been hauled into court and totally excluded from all media simply for describing reality. The French intellectual Gilles Capel, an admirably intelligent and enlightened man, carefully describes the three waves of jihadism in the West during the last 30 years. It's a painstaking, illuminating account he presents. And for doing this, he has been sentenced to death by jihadists. So now everywhere he goes, a police escort accompanies him. He has, as he wittily says, been sentenced to death by his own subject. The attempt to murder intelligence is most visible when you see individuals who have something to say being silenced. Such people as Jonathan Haidt, Peter Hitchens, Jordan Peterson, Julian Assange. But it's not a new phenomenon. Intelligence has always been the enemy of poisonous orthodoxies. George Orwell, Nietzsche, Socrates, Galileo. One of my personal favourites, Tony Benn, was often ridiculed as an extremist, usually for pointing out a common-sense truth about something and for having a grasp of history. Some rebels do hold on to an ability to think, and it's noticeable that quite a few of the most original minds, like George Orwell and Pascal, never went to university, or pretty soon rejected it, such as Nietzsche. When we murder intelligence, we murder the best part of ourselves. British liberalism is founded in the fight for religious liberty. But in dumping Christianity, liberalism has turned itself into a form of religion, has become self-aggrandizing, virtue-signalling, and self-destructive. If you try and understand why members of the elite get so cross when others don't follow their lead, it's illuminating. It's partly to do with a sense of entitlement. People talk of a culture of entitlement among those on benefit, but the elite has its own entitlement culture. They think they are the most intelligent people in society, little aware that intelligent thought is precisely what they have lost. They think that because they hold a degree in politics or media studies, they understand the world better than a hospital porter in Manchester. They think they know best, and therefore their view should prevail. They also think they are morally superior because their opinions are called virtuous. Anyone who appears not to subscribe to these views must of necessity be an apostate or a lunatic misled by alternative media. It's offensive to the elite that the work of Satan should prevail. And there's nothing new in this. Socrates was prosecuted and forced to kill himself simply for talking to people. It was seen as corrupting Athenian youth to get them to ask questions about life. Galileo was tried and sentenced to house arrest for the rest of his life for publishing the heretical idea that the Earth was not the centre of the universe and actually orbited around the sun. The fact that he was right was irrelevant. Only the prevailing orthodoxy is allowed to be right, even if it's wrong. This is the death of constructively used intelligence. If a member of the elite bumps into the fact that many Muslims do not approve of gays, and some would even like them murdered, they have to crush that thought because it isn't progressive. If a member of the elite bumps into the fact that most girls don't want to be engineers, they must crush that thought because it isn't progressive. If a member of the elite bumps into the universal fact that there are only two sexes, they must crush that thought because it isn't progressive. Eventually, you crush so much of reality that you live in cloud cuckoo land and still think it's reality. It ain't. A former student took her university to court after claiming that 2 years of study had left her with nothing more than her words, Mickey Mouse degree that has not helped her career despite graduating with a first. Hock Wong sued Anglia Ruskin University for more than £60,000. She says that claims that the institution made about a quality education and prospect of employment after graduation were fraudulent. She also alleged that she was locked in a room for trying to speak out about the quality of her course during her graduation ceremony, and she branded this as forced imprisonment. Anyone who has worked or studied in universities, as I have, knows that they are rapidly becoming factories for creating low-status knowledge, opinions rather than facts, and that the spirit which wished to sharpen and develop the sorts of intelligence that shaped and elevated Western societies is being handcuffed and led to the chopping block. It is downright murder. Several people have said to me, but what about emotional intelligence? Well, okay, it's fine. But the trouble is, it's such a hopelessly subjective term that it can only lead to squabbles. Emotional intelligence often seems to mean that my feelings are better than yours. Samsung offered a program in which a process of hypnosis will wipe someone's memories of their favourite TV show so they can watch it again. No, it's really true. Anyone dumb enough to have their memories erased for the sake of some crappy TV show deserves to have their brain atrophied. The implications are huge here. We know that the US used hypnosis during the Vietnam War so that soldiers would have the horrors erased and they would go into battle again. Technology will perhaps be the true death of human intelligence. A Frankenstein story. One would hope that in science, intelligence still has primacy, but much science has become hopelessly politicised and made a handmaiden to profit in things like pharmaceuticals and the most recently publicised one, of course, climate change. It may well be that there is a crisis in climate change, in which case, why are people so hysterical about listening to an alternative point of view? Why do they refuse to debate? I hold up my hands and admit that I'm too ignorant about climate change to have an intelligent and informed opinion, although I'm trying to remedy that. But I start to smell a rat when scientists who have a different view to the prevailing orthodoxy, which is that Armageddon is just around the corner, are shut up or shouted down. 500 climate experts recently sent a petition to the UN saying that there is no crisis. Was this reported on mainstream news? Of course not. Why not? Why can't the public listen to and participate in proper, rational, fact-based discussion, instead of nightly watching the same old propaganda churned out by the sausage factory establishment? It's because intelligent debate is frowned upon. You either follow the herd or you're a fascist world destroyer. And when a cult is manufactured around a truant OCD teenager with Asperger's and selective mutism, enter Greta Thunberg, I smell a bigger rat. When the kids start shouting the odds, it usually means the adults have left the room. Child figure guru cults have always alarmed me. They usually signify some form of totalitarian thinking. The Nazis were fond of using the child figure in posters, or of sickening religious piety. At least Jesus had the decence to go away and do some grown-up work as a carpenter before he began his ministry in earnest.